Welcome everyone to 123 Chess. In case you're wondering what 123 stands for, the 1 is review, the 2 is analyze, and 3 is, well, improve. And it's been an exciting journey so far. My name is Luke again, and I'm with Tom.
Yep, I'm Tom. That's my baby and my wife in the background.
Yeah, awesome. So we are here this week to review our game 5, in which Tom played as white. And so Tom, would you like to go ahead and kick the review off today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I knew I was playing white, and knowing that I was going to play white, I decided to do something bold and exciting and outside of my comfort zone. And I started with this C4 move.
Yeah.
The English opening. And right out of the gate, I'm uncomfortable.
You did it to yourself, but it's a sweet opening.
I did it to myself. I did practice the game a little bit before this game and studied the lines a little bit, so I knew going in a little bit of what I was trying to accomplish. It's a flank attack. I'm trying to attack the center. Luke's response is pretty typical, and what you're seeing here is kind of mainline. And then, the idea is you're shadowing that bishop as white. And then I get this from Luke, and I bring my knight out. And actually, I did this, and I do think that I made a mistake here. Luke didn't do anything about it, but I think it was just an order of operations thing. This pawn right here is technically hanging, and I think he could have taken it. I don't know if that's the correct move or not. But either way, he chose not to do it, and I said, okay, well, I need to take care of that hanging pawn problem, and capture it there. So we get it taken back, and just sort of develops this way, bringing the knights out, and that move there sort of forces my castle, and we get a castle back. Deflecting that bishop. And actually, this was one that I was kind of excited about because I've seen as kind of common lines in the English opening that this bishop really likes to go to b2. Obviously, that pawn is in the way. Well, I deflected that bishop there, and then seeing it get kicked back to a5 was nice because now I could bring this pawn out attacking and simultaneously make room for my bishop there. So has to move the bishop one more time, and like I said, bringing that bishop to this side, which is really nice. Kind of big for English systems. You get those two bishops there. That have that nice line right down the, or nice diagonal right down the center of the board.
Yeah, it's scary as black, let me tell you.
Simultaneously, we say that, and I did mention to Luke, like, I said at the beginning of the video, I'm uncomfortable. And right now, just looking at this board state, baby, just looking at this board state, it's funny because looking at these pieces here, this is 90% of my games that I play. Like,
really? Wow.
I feel so comfortable having my knights, in those respective positions, and then the two center pawns in the middle of the board like that.
Oh, like that you have it.
And that's usually my position.
Yeah, okay.
I'm very comfortable with that being my position.
Yes.
But this is obviously nothing like that. From Mike's perspective.
And I'm usually comfortable with the position you have with the three kettled bishops. That's like my jam.
So, I mean, the entire time I'm sitting here and I'm just thinking to myself, like, oh, gosh, like, I have no center of the board presence. Like, Luke's just completely dominating that. But I know, that's not the theory behind this style of opening. The theory is like, okay, I've ceded some control of that center with kind of the anticipation of taking a strike at that center of the board a little bit later, which is what these bishops help to do. They give me that additional attacker down the center. So we see the game evolve. This was the first move that I notated down. Just signaling the enter of the mid game. I commented on the way the board was set up before, right? That's really the opening. We had secured our openings. We had castled, and so this to me was indicative that we were moving to the middle. I was a little uncertain about this. I vaguely remember that being discussed in some of the stuff that I had studied beforehand. That was a typical spot for the queen, but I wasn't entirely sure. This is where I started to like get outside of my comfort zone, outside of the things that I knew like were things that I was supposed to be doing. Right as we're entering the mid game, which kind of makes sense. I said too, I felt good about this because I was putting pressure on this d5 pawn. Again, just attacking that middle, like putting that pressure on the middle because I'm trying to establish like a flanking attack. Again, uncomfortable for me because my attack for the middle, I tend to want to do just this. I just want to jam down the center, but I know I'm going for a flank attack. So I end up moving here, and I like this move a lot because I actually knew too that one of the ideas that you have going in the English system or the English opening is you want to trade off that light squared bishop. You want to get that light squared bishop out of the way because your light squared bishop is so powerful in the English, and in fact, the theory behind, the strategy behind this opening is you're trying to control the light squares. And if you just kind of like look where things are, you've got really strong presence over all of these, right? And then not to mention that one down the line. And that was another reason why I felt comfortable putting my queen here too, was because queen stays on the light squares and is supporting light squares. So the idea is you're supposed to just be dominating the white squares with the English. So getting that light squared bishop out of the way seemed like a good opportunity to do that. So then we get this, obviously threatening the queen. And it was a little surprising for me. I didn't love moving my queen there. Certainly a little bit more restrictive of a spot, but I didn't want to take it away from attacking that center. So then we get him developing, and exactly what I talked about, wanting to trade off that square. So I do. He chooses to double up the pawns, but frees up that line for his rook, that file. Developing pawn, attacking the middle. This is where you kind of see a little bit of push back again toward the middle. Dancing my queen around a little bit. Let's see here. Okay, so this is what I put down. This one right here is what I put down as my next move. It definitely was something that I thought about a fair amount. I was having a really difficult time deciding which. I wanted to move a rook. I liked the idea of getting a rook into this file, but I wasn't sure which one would be best.
Yeah, the which rook question. That's a challenge for me a lot of times.
Yeah. And, I think I ultimately decided on this one because I thought this file might get opened up. I think that was kind of my logic there. And I was like, well, if this file gets opened up because, something like take, right? Then I would like to already have a rook positioned there that can contest that file versus having to, try to juggle the pieces together. So that was just, one more thought. It was something that had taken a little bit of time for me. Bishop. Oh yeah, and I said that's really where I wanted the bishop. Anyway, I ended up doing this.
Hanging pawn, no.
Hanging pawn, yeah. So they were take that pawn. I think that I didn't realize at the time that was nice. I thought, but yeah. So here goes. There's the capture, right? And this is why I wanted that file open anyway. We get that, and then this move here, which really was like it created a lot of frustration for me. I don't know, a lot of tension. It was this was a move that got me, and especially because I had hummed and hawed about which rook to move so much prior to this. Now I was like, oh man, it'd really be nice to have that rook on f1. They didn't. I had moved it already, for good or for bad. And so I'm just staring down this pawn because I'm seeing this and this. And I'm like, oh man, this is a really solid attack that he's got going here. And so I end up making just this terrible move right here. And I move that rook with the idea of, okay, I want to defend that pawn. Yeah, he can capture my rook with that, but if he does, I take with the queen, and I'm still defending that pawn. And this is where all of my focus was this pawn. Oh my gosh, I have to defend this pawn. If you're astute, you will notice after capture, oh, look what was hanging, the bishop hanging. And so he takes that bishop, which is definitely good for him. Just sort of in retrospect, you know, the thing that I had considered here in my first analysis is, what if I had moved this pawn forward instead? I think that probably would have been the move to do. I'm still not like in love with where my position is with that move, but it's not bad. I still haven't done anything blocking my diagonal with the bishop, which is the major theme. That's what you're really fighting for in this. You don't want to get that diagonal bogged down. So I still have that. Available to me with that move. Yeah, and you know, it obviously it protects my bishop. He wouldn't just capture, and it would have been. I think it would have been a little bit more interesting had I not done that. This is what happened. Just attacking that. And we just see a little movement here. And now, at this point in time, what I'm trying to go for is I'm trying to trade off pieces. I'm trying to simplify this board state, because now he's got this material advantage, and I'm hoping to just one-for-one trade and get to a point where, I don't know, he has maybe a knight over my position, and I can draw the game.
Especially because the queens are still on the board.
Yes. Yeah. So we're getting boom, big old trade off of pieces, big old trade, big old trade, big old trade. With a check moves, I can capture that pawn. And you know, the material advantages consist of one pawn difference because of the more pawns. Unfortunately, from this position, though, the way that I looked at it, I knew I was going to lose a pawn here. And I decided that my best bet was to do this move with the delay. And that was because he had the two. I needed to move my king out of the way. If I didn't move my king out of the way, and if I moved my rook over there first, then he could have gone here and checked. And then I would have been in more trouble because he had the two pieces that were on it. And so he would have gotten that tempo associated with that. And so that was what I was afraid of. I knew he was going to be able to take the bishop there. But again, because these two pieces were lined up, once I put my rook here, he can't defend them both. But he can't take that pawn. That was the pawn that I knew I was going to lose in that exchange. So again, I've simplified the board state. And here, like, honestly, if what I'm trying to accomplish is trading off pieces, right, and get him to a point where I can draw the game, I'm not doing it's not end of the world here.
No, it's not.
What I really want to do is I really want to trade off these rooks. If
Yep.
these rooks are gone, it's going to be really tough for Luke to win the game.
Yep.
And so that's what becomes my primary goal here. I mean, this is definitely a disadvantageous position to white. But working toward trying to trade off those.
There
rooks.
it is. There it is.
Offering that trade. Luke's not going to do it.
The old me would have probably when we no seriously when we played our game one, the me at that time would have probably done it.
Yeah. Well, and so that's where we're firing away. And he really does a good job of dodging those. I get my pawns in that line there, which is usually pretty solid in the end game. Though I do like having them on white squares because of the dark square bishop. But we get this, and then here is my, so I need to be more aware of the dark squares, which I did need to be more aware of the dark squares. Honestly, at this point in time, moving my king here probably would have been fine. It probably would have been a smarter idea because then I'm not so worried about his dark square bishop and what it can do. Because then this happens and I make a critical error of moving there. And so, like I said, dark squares, I needed to be aware. Well, I ended up putting both my rook and my king on dark squares. What happens when you make a mistake like that? Boom. And so the game is pretty much over at this point. I do a futile check, which is just fixed with that. He gets that piece for free, and now I'm just durdling, losing pieces, checking. Obviously, game completely over for me. My only hope is just stalemating at this point, but he's not going to do that. So we got here, promotion to a queen, and that's checkmate. So that was our game. That was the English system. It was again. It was definitely uncomfortable for me to play, but this alone was a great learning opportunity, especially because I've encountered the English system. I see people when I'm playing games that will kick off the game with that c4, and when I'm playing black, because I just was so unfamiliar with the English opening. When I saw c4, my usual response was like, "Oh shoot, I have no idea what to do." So this gave me a good game plan, and I'm excited to go into it even further.
Nice, awesome. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah,
that
take
was
away, Luke.
Very insightful. All right, so hopping over to my review here. All right, let's kick this off. So here we go with the c4, and my whole idea here was preventing this pawn from hitting there. Okay, and obviously preparing for this move here, which, as I mentioned in my notes, the only way he can stop it would be to move this pawn here, which, since I know he's going to fianchetto his bishop, it blocks that in, so then it has no ability to see through there. Okay, now this is where Tom mentioned, which I agree, theoretically I could have taken this. However, my ultimate goal was to just dominate the center with pawns. So I wanted a pawn duo in the center, and that's what I wanted. So, and after a couple moves, I got it. So this was kind of my goal in those first few moves. One thing I don't like, and again, if you guys have been watching these games we've reviewed since we began this project, all of them but one, Tom knew way more than I did about opening theory. The London system last time was the only exception to that, and this definitely follows suit with the rest of them. I knew very little, if anything, about the English, but what I did know is that a flank pawn was played first, and because of that, I wanted, when all the opening pawn moves were done, I wanted to be the one that had the 2 pawns remaining in the center strong. So that was kind of a big excitement for me, for what it's worth. Okay, and after he plays d3, then the question I was asking myself is, should I develop my other knight first, or should I go ahead and develop this bishop somewhere? So that was what was going through my mind. I chose the knight, you know, following the knights before bishop principle that all beginners learn. I went with that. Okay, and then right here, I took a long time on the clock on this move. Reason being, I felt uncomfortable because I didn't really know what my best continuation was. There's a lot of options. I have, for instance, this pawn here preventing his pin on my knight to queen. I also had something to do with my bishop, whether it goes here or whether it goes here, one of those 2 spots. And then the other move I mentioned is I could have done something with perhaps even moving this bishop here, so that should he move this pawn up, I have a pin on this piece. So those were the 3 kind of candidate moves that I was thinking. I ended up choosing this one. And it seemed great at first because, well, I have a pin of, you know, obviously I'm developing with tempo in the sense that I created a pin. I'm preparing for myself to castle. So all looks well until the obvious next move, when I basically nudged Tom to castle right away. And by doing that, notice how my bishop is staring down at nothing. And so he's looking pretty dumb. And if I ended up I don't want to take, because I mean, I'd like the bishop pair. And then that gives another more central pawn. Like, I just don't want that. So this was a spot when I feel like I overlooked that very simple concept. And I feel like it would have been better placed here. Because look, if I was there, there's the king. So that was going through my mind at that moment. And then here we have a castling just following suit. Okay, and then at this point I said, yep, I saw this coming, but I do think b6 will be an okay spot for my bishop. So then the continuation is very logical. Tom continues to push and kick my bishop back further. And at this point, I realized, wait a minute, if I go here, which I was originally thinking, now he can pop his knight in here. So then I'll move back further. And now he can plop his knight in here, which ultimately coaxes this pawn up, opening this diagonal further for his bishop. So that was going through my mind at that moment. So I decided to go to c7 instead. And I understand this is kind of lame because, well, I'm kind of facing a brick wall, but, you know, given proper context and situation, there's potential there still. Okay, and now I'm going to read what I said, Tom. I said, he now has 2 powerful fianchettoed bishops. I really don't like this. So kind of the opposite of what Tom mentioned.
Yeah, I don't like it either.
So we're even. And then I said, but more importantly, it's hard to know what to do here to improve my position. So I was thinking things like, well, I could go a6 with my pawn, because I really think this would be annoying. Then he's hitting my bishop. So that's kind of what I went with. Just a kind of very simple thinking there. All right, and now with his queen on b3, obviously this is very much trying to capitalize on my weakness here with this pawn. I don't have any other pawns guarding it. It's a hole essentially, and so because of that, so this is the moment of the game when I had more strategic planning than any other moment in the game. So Tom already mentioned, which I think was really helpful to keep in mind, that his idea with moving this knight here, should I move my bishop up here, was a very logical, and I would reckon it's something that pretty much all of us would do, because it's a very strategic option. So what I was here's what I was thinking. I'm going to take you a little bit through Luke's mind. All right, so at this point, I knew, look at the board first and see the development. I'm 2 pieces behind in development, so that's no bueno. But it is fairly close, so that's not as crucial as if, say, we were playing like the Scotch game or something. And so because of that, I'm like, I obviously my ultimate goal is development, but I decided, what if I bring my bishop here? If I bring that here, then I'm X-raying his queen. So that poses a threat. So in that sense, I'm developing with tempo. But of course, if you do that, you also have to keep in mind this, because his knight is definitely going to want to hit your bishop and trade it off. And as Tom mentioned, I actually wasn't thinking of, because again, Tom knew more than me about this opening theory. He mentioned how the light squares, trying to control those was a logical continuation in this system. Well, I didn't know that, but that further points to the logic of his taking my bishop. But what I thought was, okay, so if he takes that bishop on the e6 square with his knight, then I would be actually more than happy. Now, this is something that I've grown in, I think, over the last couple months, because normally I'd be like, oh, great, I don't ever want to lose my bishop. But this time I decided, okay, if I take it with the pawn, I'm now, let me get rid of all the arrows. So if I take it with the pawn, now I'm fortifying this pawn with the pawn, and I'm opening up my rook, which if my knight can get in here, then this square becomes a weakness for Tom. So in addition to that, check this out. So if this knight comes here, this square is now open for my knight to hit his queen. So that was that was pretty much everything that was going on in my mind at that point. And so in conclusion, fortifying the center with another pawn, because that was a weakness that, again, look at all his pieces, they're all attacking it. So that guarding with the pawn is the best, especially if it opens up my rook. So that's kind of what happened. And because it was so logical in what his reply would be, because that's what any, logical solid player would do, that's exactly what happened. The knight came there. So at this point I was thinking, great, okay, like my strategy obviously was logical. I already predicted that he would do this, and I knew what I would do if he did that. And so now I went for this right away. I wasn't sure if he was going to move his queen first, maybe back here, probably not here. But either way, then if he takes this bishop, I already know I'm gonna take it with the pawn. So he moves his queen first. I like that because that's one square, less scary, I guess, than it was. And then I moved my queen because this pawn's going to need another defender too, in addition to my other pawn, should he advance here and start taking. So that's why my idea was bring one of these rooks in to help. So he takes. There we go. Everything according to plan so far. Now this move, obviously if I go here, I'm going to get trapped. Don't want to do that. Here, can't do that, obviously. Here, it kind of is dumb, because then if he just advances this pawn, maybe I'll move back. Here, I didn't like that so much. Here, probably an exchange is going to happen, because then it'll open up his other bishop, but I'm okay with that right now. I don't really feel like it poses an immense threat to me, and sure, why not simplify it a little bit? So that's what happens. Take. Of course, I'm going to take with my queen, get her in a better place. This pawn's hanging right now. Keep that in mind. Okay, his queen comes up. I don't like this because right now, okay, this moment, Tom, I think was the one time I actually clarified that I felt stuck. I felt stuck because look at the board. I mean, he's got two fianchetto bishops aiming at the center. He's going to get ready to make a pawn break here soon. This right here is a threat, which will open up this file that his rook's on. It's going to be a very open position potentially. Also,
I really like that it's following me moving my queen just that one square, which is funny. It's the square that you had kicked her off of, and it was like we both recognized like it's a good square for the queen to be on.
Yeah, it's a good point. So yeah, that really, I do think that move of your queen was a very solid move. So yeah, with that in mind, I decided to, I knew that this was a threat. For me right now, I see that as the biggest threat in the board, aside from maybe one of the rooks coming to try to own the C file. So because of that, I decided, okay, I'm going to start a threat there too, because you're going to open it up already. Why don't I start with the initiative? And then, well, didn't we just mention I thought the rook was going to come in here? It's exactly what he did. Now, I probably, if I was Tom, I probably would have moved that rook too, because again, the whole idea is this is going to get open maybe. So, you know, why not? Okay. Now, I actually thought about this for a little bit, and I didn't like, okay, come on, who's going to think this is a great spot for my bishop in this position? Because seriously, he's staring down a wall and he's not doing anything. I don't like that. So I got so hung up on that idea that I forgot that this stinking pawn was hanging. So then obviously Tom capitalizes on it. That's what you do when when your opponent makes a mistake. So I decided at this point, I needed to read what I said. I was like, oh my goodness, I can't believe in my calculation where I put the bishop, I totally forgot my hanging pawn. Now this was where, again, I keep referring to the old me, but this is where I had to break out of uh, my emotional hang up. I was hung up on that pawn that he just took. And I said, now I have to prove that my defense is not destroyed by that pawn dropping. I have to stay on the offense. So that was kind of the driving philosophy that I forced myself into in the next few moves. So I decided I'm going to initiate this. If we're going to exchange queens, so be it. Okay. Now this pawn is a weakness. So we got two pawns that could potentially be hanging in the future. Now, obviously, he'll probably go like here, but case in point, there's still options for me. It's not over, and I had to keep reminding myself that because I said in this position, one thing that I noticed is that my knight going here will fork this pawn and his bishop. And so as soon as I saw that, obviously that was my way to maintain the initiative. And so I did it. Now, at this point, I actually also saw that there's ideas of, you know, some way to guard this square, right? But once this happened, again, this is the, you know, trying not to be the old Luke. I learned that when someone blunders or makes a mistake, just like Tom did a great job of capitalizing on it, he punished it right when I did it. So now I punished it right when he did it. But I did an in-between move before. See, I used to have this idea where I would just go ahead and take it right away. But keep in mind, if I take this piece, there we go, his queen's back a space again. And that further, and then this pawn's hanging, and this pawn's hanging. So I took that first, and then took the bishop. Okay, and now the pawn comes one more further pointing out the obvious reality that this stupid bishop is really not in a great square. So yeah, that's fun. Okay, now I'm attacking. So what am I doing here? I'm forking his rook and his pawn. So my whole idea with that move is, so if I could coax his, I'm basically trying to provoke his rook to move back, so then I can move here to control this file. That's what happened. All right, so now this pawn move, I instantly was thinking, well, first of all, it took me a few moments to see this obvious pawn hanging, which I ended up taking. But in this position, I recognized that, well, first of all, I didn't want to take here because check this out with check. Yeah, I definitely don't want to do that. So, but since I have my queen there, if he takes it, then obviously take, and then take, 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 and then my king would move, and then it would really simplify the position for me. I, at this point, don't want the queens on the board. Take, 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 move. exactly what was the idea. All right, so now his bishop moving back here, attacking my rook. Tom, I really felt uncomfortable here, and you can probably imagine why. I have two pieces stacked up in the D file, so I know one of those is going to probably drop. One would like to check here, but again, then it leaves the other one hanging, and they're both hanging if one's taken. And I don't like it that my back rank is still very open, and I will lose if I get back rank mated. Now, again, a higher level player would just chuckle at what I just said and say, so what? So what? You have a better position here. Just play logical chess. You'll be fine. And I did, but I still have to reiterate my emotions. I had to keep them at bay for this part. So I decided I probably should have gone here or else, I don't know. There's a couple ideas. I think this is going to be one of my moves. Unlike Tom, I wasn't as cool this time, and I didn't come up with my 3 moves already. So, but right here, moving my rook, what was I trying to do? Well, obviously, I was threatening to take his bishop, so he had to do something about that. He moved his king instead, which I know he's going to take my knight. That's what's coming. But if he takes my knight, at least I'll get this passed pawn out of there. All the while, I don't like this stinking back rank. Okay, now at this point, it probably would have been a better idea for me to move my bishop first, or I don't know. There's a few other ideas again, but I went here. Okay, bringing the king out, bringing the bishop back. At this point, I said, I really like my position. It's fully protected. The bank rank is no longer an option. And now it's just a matter of maintaining my, my rook and bishop on the board. And this spot, I really did have to think a second. I really did have to remind myself of the reality that, Luke, if you take that rook, you're going to put yourself in a real challenge. And any grandmaster or anyone has good experience in endgames can totally do it. And I believe I could do it too, but it would not go without a lot of careful calculation, because those 3 pawns are well organized. So I didn't take it. My whole goal here, kick that king back. Okay, and once he got here, now I could start advancing. So that's what happens, and the pin. And from here, I'm sure I could have continued this a little bit faster. I'm sure there were a few moves I could have been a little more accurate. But my whole goal here was simply to simplify the position down so that I could snatch the last pawn and promote to a queen. Again, I'm sure that there is a way I could have probably checkmated with my rook and bishop and king, but all in all, it was probably the most logical kind of way I would have continued. So that is my perspective.
Very cool. Yeah, it was. I mean, it was a fun game to play. Honestly, I'm certain that I will pull the English opening out of my pocket again at some point in time. It was definitely a fun one.
Key lessons real quick.
Man, I was unprepared with my key lessons, but I think one would be it's checking for obvious hanging pieces. With this, this one had come from just my limited study of the opening, and I knew, like, positionally I wanted a pawn here, I wanted knight here, I wanted bishop here, I want my other knight here, and so a lot of that was me. A lot of this in the beginning was me just trying to get to those positions. Obviously, like we said, Luke didn't take this pawn here, but he probably could have.
Yeah, I probably could have.
And I think that that really just goes to emphasize the importance of checking those hanging pieces, which I do feel like I'm getting better at. But you know, I had two of those pieces in this game. I think you know, just the putting an attack together with the English is something that I can work a little harder on. Just feeling that sense of comfort with the fianchettoed bishops. That was a difficult point for me. Yeah, I mean, again, it's the hanging piece here. That I felt like my gameplay was honestly pretty solid this game. I felt good about my gameplay.
Yeah.
With the exception of that early hanging pawn and obviously that hanging bishop. Those I would say more than anything else, it's just the key takeaway of saving the hanging pieces. I do think that this exchange here is definitely worth looking into. You know, I'm down in material here. I know simplifying a board state usually favors whoever has the lead in material. I didn't have a better plan at this point, though.
What if you took it with your bishop instead?
If I took, yeah, I'm sorry, if I took what with the bishop?
So like if in the when you initiated the exchange where we both got rid of our queens, what if when I took it with the pawn, you took it with the bishop instead?
I gotcha. Because from here, you're not going to take you can't capture.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I mean, obviously that's a really bad spot for your bishop right now, but it's interesting nonetheless.
It is. I mean, I still have this move, right? I still have that rook move because those people are lined up.
Yeah.
And I mean, the bishop is defended, and you're moving that bishop. You're still in check. So maybe that's not bad because I mean, not that you're going to do this here, right? But from this position, if you did, oh, you're in check. Oh well, yeah, you'd have to move. You'd have to move the king at this point.
Anyway, it's an idea. I don't know.
Yeah, it's definitely something that's worth exploring. It wouldn't have created such a mass trade-off of pieces. I mean, this does feel like it's pretty strong, especially with the king, you know, buried there behind the two pawns. I mean, I don't know if I could get something like this in with the intention of getting my queen down there, getting the trade-off.
Yeah.
Right, and then end up checkmating with the rook and try to go for something like that. Because you know, I'm just limited in my pieces, and you've got quite the attack going here too. So, but I don't know. I think that the idea of moving the bishop there, taking with the bishop, is definitely boring.
Yeah.
So I think that's the other one is just working on those transitions between the mid game and the end game as well, and how to best capitalize on a weaker position, right? How to best approach the end game with material disadvantage.
Nice.
And then obviously to the other one, which I certainly know, but I didn't follow myself, is endgame. Definitely key takeaway is when you see a bishop on the board, if there's only one bishop on the board, you should try to avoid, just as a general rule, putting your pieces on that colored square. If I was trying to stay on white squares, that would avoid this from happening.
Yeah.
And on that, this is not the situation that we're looking at right now, but a little helpful piece of advice that I learned is you've got a same sort of a thing that happens with knights at the end of the game too. It's very common if you're playing, you get near the end of the game and your opponent has a knight, you've got a king, especially if you're playing like blitz, and you're not taking that time, you don't have as much time to analyze your position and how that knight's gonna move. Very frequently you'll get forked your king and let's say you have a rook, right? You have a king and a rook and you're playing against somebody who has their knight on the board. very often what they're trying to do with that knight is fork your
Mm-hmm.
with your major piece, and the knight has to attack all of the same colored squares every single turn. And so similar to this, in that if you've got the dark squared bishop, then you want to try to avoid being on dark squares. With a situation where there's knight on the board, what you should try to do, especially when you're playing quickly, is try to avoid having your king on the same color as your rook or whatever the major piece is that you're trying to attack with.
Yeah, that's a really important concept. I mean, it's definitely applicable a lot of times, especially in blitz where it's hard to calculate quickly.
Yeah.
Good point.
So yeah, just that general principle of avoiding the dark squares.
Perfect.
The other one.
Okay, so for mine, I had 3 quick key takeaways. Going to my board. And so basically, the first thing is once I get to this position where I mentioned that I didn't know kind of how to continue, I went here. But I guess I'll start with a different principle first. So my number 1 would be finding a permanent home for your pieces. So when you develop, you don't just want to place it in a spot that looks good right away, because going right here looks good because I have a pin, but what's going to come next? It's provoking the castling, which just further helps my opponent and makes my bishop look silly. Whereas if I went here, then, well, now we have a little bit better spot for him in the long run because he's going to eye down where the king will be. And then keep in mind, let's say Tom's knight tries to kick it. Well, then check this out. Then once my bishop goes here, what if his knight wants to go back? I've just gained a tempo on him. So that's, and this is still not a terrible spot. So the point is, again, where is the long-term place for your pieces when you develop them, not just the instantaneous gratification. We're in an instant gratifying culture, and it does apply to chess as well, where we want that great spot right away, but sometimes you got to be patient.
I think it was in our first game, Luke, where I had talked about it was flip side. I think I was playing white, but it was the same sort of position for my bishop. I had said, when I was a younger man, I liked to bring my bishop out to G5. Similar thing, you get that easy pin on.
Yeah.
But I've said, since growing up, that I like bringing my bishop out here, and I think you had said. Oftentimes that that fifth row often doesn't stay there. It's not a permanent place for the bishop.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we see there because it's so easily kicked by the pawns.
Yeah. Good point. I like that, reviewing back on our game 1, because that definitely was what we mentioned, and that's what you said. Also, piggybacking off what you just said, another thing for our viewers, all of you guys, keep in mind another thing. When you have a side of the board that your opponent has a fianchettoed bishop, and they try to pin your knight like would be traditional, one simple pawn move does not allow them this opportunity, because this square is not an option, because they will get trapped, because then you will advance, like Tom just mentioned. So basically, the idea of the fianchettoing of a bishop really changes the whole structure of what your options are. And if I would have kept that in mind, I would have probably ruled this move out, because why even do that? Because this move does nothing. The pin does not stand, because it'll kick him out of that diagonal entirely. So that's interesting. Yeah, so that was my first, is just permanent home for your pieces when you develop them, not just instant gratification. My second one is hanging pieces. It's just what Tom mentioned. But if we just look at the spot where I was right here and he was attacking my bishop, and I was thinking of what is the best spot for my bishop, but I was forgetting the obvious reality. Keep the obvious reality at the forefront of your mind when you're doing calculations in your mind. So that is the main thing for that principle. And then the last one for me, the last lesson to learn from this is don't just create threats, prevent your opponent's threats. And so I had my own game plan. I had what I wanted to do, but probably the more challenging thing, and again, as we continue to progress in our game and as you continue to improve, you'll find that all of the higher level players are simultaneously, in addition to their own threats that they're creating on the board, they're at the same time trying to parry their opponent's threats. And so again, sounds super simple, but easier said than done on the board, because in the case of this position, let's say that I did move the proper move of my bishop, okay? Then even if I did that, the question is, how should I continue it? And there's a lot of things to think about. What is the ultimate threat that Tom has? What kind of pawn breaks are probably going to occur next? So anyway, that was probably my last lesson. So again, in conclusion, hanging pieces, just keep the simple things at the forefront of your mind. Permanent home for your pieces to make sure that you know where they'll ultimately want to be. And don't just create threats, but prevent your opponent's threats.
Again, this was a really fun game. Thanks everybody for joining us. Keep practicing.
Yeah, thanks guys. We'll see you next week for our analysis time. Bye.